The air in the grand ballroom wasn't just thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition. It was crackling with the electric tension of a story about to reach its climax, though no one knew it yet. For one man, Nathaniel Sterling, this was the pinnacle of his success, a night to be crowned king. For one woman, his ex-wife Catherine Vance, it was supposed to be a quiet night of professional obligation. But in a world of blinding spotlights and whispered gossip, a single microphone can become a weapon. And tonight, a weapon fired in arrogance would trigger an explosion of consequence that would bring an entire industry to its knees. The Apex Innovators Gala was the Oscars of the tech world, a self-congratulatory spectacle held in the cavernous ballroom of the St. Regis, New York. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as frozen waterfalls, dripped light onto a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The clinking of champagne flutes was the evening's percussion, a constant rhythm beneath the murmur of billion-dollar deals and carefully curated pleasantries. Nathaniel Sterling swam through these waters like a shark. He was the CEO of Momentum Dynamics, a company that had, under his leadership, become the darling of the Aethelred global conglomerate. He was handsome in a severe corporate way, sharp jaw, meticulously styled, dark hair, and eyes that held the cold glint of perpetual calculation. On his arm was Brielle, a model, 2 decades his junior, a stunning accessory, whose laughter was as bright and empty as the flashbulbs that followed them. Tonight, Nathaniel was slated to receive the Innovator of the Year award. It was in his mind an inevitability, a confirmation of his genius. He moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, shaking hands, clapping backs, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. He was a king in his court, and he savoured every moment of the adulation. Then he saw her. Catherine Vance stood near a marble pillar observing the spectacle with a quiet detachment. She wasn't dressed to compete. While other women wore vibrant silks and audacious sequins, Catherine wore a simple, impeccably tailored, navy blue gown that spoke of elegance, not extravagance. Her auburn hair was styled in a low, graceful chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of understated pearl earrings. She held a glass of sparkling water, a small island of calm in the churning ocean of egos. A flash of irritation crossed Nathaniel's face, a barely perceptible tightening around his mouth. He hadn't expected her to be here. Their divorce, finalized 2 years ago, had been acrimonious. He had painted her as the unsupportive, unambitious wife who couldn't keep up with his meteoric rise. In reality, she had been the co-architect of his early success, the strategist behind the curtain, whose contributions he had systematically erased from the corporate narrative. "Well, well," he said, steering Brielle toward her. His voice was a smooth, condescending purr. "Catherine, I must say I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this was your kind of scene." Brielle looked Catherine up and down, a flicker of dismissive curiosity in her eyes. "Nate, honey, who is this?" "This is Catherine," Nathaniel said, the emphasis on the past tense hanging in the air. "My ex-wife." He gestured vaguely at her. "She runs what is it you call it? A little consulting firm now. Keeping busy, are we?" The insult was designed to sting, to frame her life's work as a trivial hobby. He knew exactly what Vance Strategic Solutions was. He just preferred his version of the story. Catherine's gaze was steady. She offered a polite, closed-lip smile that didn't betray a hint of the fury that once would have consumed her. She had spent 2 years forging her emotions into steel. "Nathaniel, Brielle, it's a pleasure." Her voice was low and even, a stark contrast to his performative boom. "My firm advises on corporate restructuring and efficiency. It does keep me quite busy, thank you." "Restructuring?" Nathaniel chuckled, sharing a look with a passing sycophant. "Sounds adorable. Well, don't let us keep you from your networking." He gave her a final, pitying look, as if she were a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. He then turned his back on her, a deliberate and public dismissal, and guided Brielle toward their table at the foot of the stage. The message was clear: You are in my world now, and you are nothing. Catherine watched him go, her knuckles white around her glass. The old wounds throbbed with a familiar ache. She remembered the nights spent mapping out business plans on their kitchen table plans, he later presented as his own. She remembered him calling her meticulous research overly cautious, and her brilliant insights cute ideas. He hadn't just left her, he had tried to dismantle her sense of self-worth, brick by painful brick. A waiter passed, and she placed her untouched glass on his tray. She took a deep, steadying breath, straightened her shoulders, and let her gaze sweep across the room. Nathaniel saw her as a ghost from his past, a footnote in his grand story. He had no idea she was the author of the next chapter. He thought she was here as a spectator. He was wrong. She was here for the kill. She wasn't just a guest. She was an invited VIP of the night's true power, the man who owned the entire chessboard, Alistair Finch, the formidable chairman of Aethelred Global. Her work wasn't just keeping her busy. It was about to change everything. The gala was just beginning, but for Nathaniel Sterling, the end was already in sight. The gala unfolded with choreographed precision. Salads were served, wine was poured, and a series of minor awards were distributed to polite, if unenthusiastic, applause. Nathaniel was a coiled spring of anticipation at his table. He held court, regaling his companions with anecdotes of his corporate conquests, while Brielle laughed on cue, her hand possessively on his arm. Every so often, his eyes would flick towards Catherine's table, a small, superior smile playing on his lips when he saw her sitting alone, speaking to no one. He interpreted her solitude as isolation, her poise as a brave face against irrelevance. Finally, the moment arrived. The host, a comedian whose jokes were as expensive as they were unfunny, boomed into the microphone. And now the award you've all been waiting for, the 2020 Apex Innovator of the Year, an award for vision, for disruption, for sheer unadulterated success. The winner is Mr. Nathaniel Sterling of Momentum Dynamics. The room erupted. Spotlights converged on Nathaniel's table as he rose, basking in the manufactured adoration. He kissed Brielle theatrically, a gesture for the cameras, and strode towards the stage with the confidence of a man who believes the world owes him its applause. He accepted the heavy stylized crystal trophy, holding it aloft like a conquered relic. Thank you. He began, his voice resonating with false humility. Thank you to the committee, to my incredible team at Momentum Dynamics, and of course, to the board of Aethelred Global for believing in our vision. He delivered the standard sanitized platitudes for the first minute. He thanked his engineers, his marketing department, his executive assistant. The crowd listened politely, but then a shift occurred. A sly, cruel light entered his eyes. He was about to go off script. You know, he said, leaning closer to the microphone, his tone becoming conspiratorial. True innovation requires sacrifice. It requires a relentless, almost monastic dedication. You have to be willing to shed everything that holds you back. You have to cut away the dead weight. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The tone had become personal. Some people, he continued, his gaze sweeping the room before landing for a fraction of a second on Catherine, are content with the small life. They have small dreams. They start little projects, little hobbies to pass the time. And that's fine. It's nice. The word nice was delivered with such dripping condescension, it felt like an obscenity. But you cannot change the world from the safety of the shallow end. You cannot build an empire if you are afraid to get your hands dirty, if you are more concerned with balance than with victory. He didn't need to say her name. Everyone who mattered in their shared social and professional circle knew exactly who he was talking about. It was a public vivisection, a deliberate and calculated humiliation, disguised as a motivational speech. He was branding her a failure on the biggest stage of his life, solidifying his narrative that he had triumphed by leaving her behind. The camera panned across the audience, and for a moment it rested on Catherine. She sat perfectly still, her expression a mask of serene neutrality. Inside, however, a storm raged. Each word was a sharpened stone hurled at the fragile edifice of composure she had so carefully constructed. He wasn't just mocking her business, he was mocking her very essence, her belief that success could be achieved with integrity and intellect rather than brute force and narcissism. She could feel the pitying stares of those around her, the whispered comments, the morbid curiosity. A slow, hot anger began to burn away the pain. An anger so cold and pure, it felt like ice in her veins. He was so blinded by his own reflection that he couldn't see the tidal wave about to crash down on him. He thought this was his coronation. He had no idea it was his public execution. Nathaniel finished his speech with a final triumphant flourish. So to all the dreamers, I say this dream bigger. Bet on yourself, and never ever settle. The applause was thunderous, fueled by the raw drama he had injected into the evening. He walked off the stage, a conquering hero, and returned to his table, where Brielle embraced him with feverish pride. He glanced at Catherine one last time, a smirk of finality on his face. Checkmate, his eyes said. Catherine met his gaze across the room. Her expression remained unchanged, but her eyes held a new light, not of defeat, but of something far more dangerous. It was the quiet, patient look of a predator that has just watched its prey walk directly into a perfectly set trap. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water, the gesture imbued with a chilling finality. The sting of his words was real, but the satisfaction of what was to come would be her balm. As the applause for Nathaniel died down, and the waiters began clearing the main course plates, Catherine remained a statue of composure. But behind her calm facade, her mind was a whirlwind, replaying not the humiliation of the last 5 minutes, but the calculated strategy of the last 18 months. The unraveling of their marriage had been a slow, insidious process. Nathaniel hadn't just cheated or left. He had gaslighted her into believing her own ambition was a flaw. She'd been the one with the MBA from Wharton, the one who saw the market gap for integrated, intuitive user interface software when he was still coding basic apps in their spare bedroom. Momentum Dynamics was born from her market analysis, her financial modeling, her strategic vision. He was the charismatic salesman, the face of the operation. She was the architect, the mind. In the beginning, they were a team, but as success grew, so did his ego. "We don't need to be that meticulous cat," he'd say, dismissing her detailed risk assessments. "You're overthinking it." Her contributions were slowly reframed as nagging her caution as fear. The final blow came when he secured the acquisition deal with Aethelred Global. In the final presentation to their board, he presented her entire 5-year strategic plan as his own singular vision. When she confronted him, he told her she was being emotional and needed to see the bigger picture, his picture. The divorce was his final act of erasure. He used his newfound wealth and power to secure a team of ruthless lawyers who painted her as a bitter woman seeking an undeserved slice of his empire. Exhausted and heartbroken, she'd accepted a settlement that was generous by normal standards, but insulting given her foundational role in the company. She walked away with enough capital to start over, and something far more valuable, a burning diamond-hard resolve. She founded Vance Strategic Solutions, from a small, leased office with a second-hand desk and a state-of-the-art computer. Her shingle was out, but she wasn't chasing just any client. She was targeting a very specific niche legacy, conglomerates struggling with innovation lag and inefficient subsidiary management. She built her reputation quietly project by project, delivering brutal but brilliant analyses that cut through corporate politics and delivered actionable, profit-driving results. Her name became a closely guarded secret in certain C-suites, a weapon to be deployed when a company needed to fix a deep structural problem. Her endgame, however, had always been Aethelred Global. She knew from the inside out that the conglomerate, while powerful, was a lumbering giant. Its tech division, propped up by the star performance of Momentum Dynamics, was riddled with redundancies and stagnant leadership in its other less glamorous subsidiaries. 16 months ago, she had leveraged a contact from her Wharton alumni network to secure a low-level meeting with a mid-tier manager in Aethelred's strategic oversight department. She presented a 10-page preliminary analysis, unsolicited, of the cross-subsidiary inefficiencies within their tech portfolio. It was so sharp, so insightful, that it was quietly escalated up the chain of command. 2 months later, she found herself in the top-floor office of the Aethelred Tower, sitting across a vast mahogany desk from Alistair Finch himself. Finch was a legend, a 70-year-old titan of industry with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for being able to smell corporate rot from a mile away. He had her unsolicited report in his hands. "This is aggressive, Ms. Vance," he'd said, his voice a low gravel. "You've identified problems my own internal auditors have been too polite or too fearful to articulate. Politeness doesn't increase shareholder value, Mr. Finch," she had replied, her voice steady. That was the beginning. For the next year, Catherine and her small elite team worked under a strict non-disclosure agreement, becoming the ghost in Aethelred's machine. She was Finch's secret weapon. They analyzed everything: supply chains, R&D pipelines, personnel redundancies, and most importantly, leadership effectiveness. Her final report, delivered 2 months ago, was a masterpiece of corporate surgery. It detailed how the entire Aethelred Tech division could be streamlined, restructured, and reinvigorated, and it had a final explosive recommendation. The current head of the division was too old guard to implement the necessary changes. A new CEO for the entire division was required, one with vision, a deep understanding of the portfolio's strengths and weaknesses, and the grit to execute a difficult turnaround. And then she analyzed the division's star player, Nathaniel Sterling. Her report on momentum dynamics was scathingly objective. It praised the company's market position, but exposed its reliance on a single product line, its dangerously high burn rate, and a corporate culture that rewarded sycophants over innovators. She pointed out that its CEO, while a brilliant marketer, lacked the operational discipline for long-term sustainable growth. He was, her report concluded, a charismatic sprinter, not a strategic marathon runner. He was a risk to Aethelred's long-term stability. Alistair Finch had read the report, his face unreadable. "You've handed me a loaded gun, Ms. Vance," he'd said, "and you've pointed it at the man who is currently our media darling." "I was hired to find the truth, Mr. Finch, not to write fan fiction," she replied. A slow smile had spread across the old man's face. "Indeed. I have one final question. In your opinion, who would be the ideal candidate to lead this new division?" Catherine had leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "The ideal candidate would be someone who wrote the playbook for its turnaround. Someone who knows where everybody is buried because they drew the map to the cemetery. Someone who understands both the grand strategy and the granular details. Someone who is being consistently, fatally underestimated." She didn't have to say her own name. He already knew. Her presence here tonight at this specific table, seated alone, was no accident. It was a piece of theatre co-directed by her and Alistair Finch, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act. As the dessert plates were being set, a different kind of hush fell over the room. The boisterous energy from Nathaniel's speech dissipated, replaced by a more sober, respectful silence. The host returned to the stage, his tone now stripped of its earlier levity. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce a true titan of industry, a man whose vision has shaped the global economic landscape for over 4 decades. Please welcome the chairman of Aethelred Global, Mr. Alistair Finch." Alistair Finch moved toward the podium, not with the energetic stride of Nathaniel, but with the deliberate, inexorable gravity of a force of nature. He was tall and lean, his silver hair immaculate, his tailored suit a study in understated power. He didn't smile or wave. He simply occupied the stage and by his mere presence commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. Even Nathaniel, still flushed with his own victory, sat up straighter. Finch adjusted the microphone, the sound echoing slightly in the silent hall. He surveyed the audience, his piercing blue eyes seeming to make individual contact with everyone at once. "Good evening," he began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that needed no amplification. "We are here tonight to celebrate innovation. We've handed out trophies, we've applauded success, and that is important. But I am not here tonight to talk about the past. I am here to talk about the future." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Aethelred Global did not become what it is by resting on its laurels. We did not thrive by celebrating yesterday's victories. We survived and we lead because we are relentlessly focused on tomorrow, and tomorrow requires a new kind of leadership. Nathaniel listened with a self-satisfied air. He heard Finch's words as an affirmation of his own ethos, the one he had just espoused in his speech. He believed Finch was setting the stage to further praise him, to perhaps even hint at a larger role for him within the conglomerate. "For the past several months," Finch continued, "we have been engaged in a top-to-bottom strategic review of our most critical division, Aethelred Tech. We looked past the headlines. We ignored the hype. We dug into the fundamentals. We analyzed the data, the culture, the leadership, and the long-term strategic viability of every single component." At the mention of a strategic review, a nervous murmur rippled through the executives in the room. This was news to almost everyone. "Our review concluded that while we have pockets of excellence, we also have significant structural weaknesses. We have redundancies. We have stagnation. We have style over substance in places where we desperately need substance." His eyes, for a fleeting moment, seemed to sweep over Nathaniel's table. Nathaniel's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't going the way he expected. "To that end," Finch announced, his voice hardening with authority, "we are enacting a radical restructuring. Effective immediately, all of Aethelred's technology subsidiaries, including Momentum Dynamics, will be consolidated under a single newly formed operational entity, Aethelred Tech Division. This division will have a new mandate, a new structure, and new leadership." The room was now utterly silent. The air crackled. This was no longer an awards gala. It was a public execution of the old guard. Everyone understood the implication. A new divisional CEO meant a new supreme commander, a new kingmaker. Nathaniel's face had gone pale. The consolidation meant his fiefdom. Momentum Dynamics was no longer his private kingdom. He would report to someone else. His mind raced, calculating the odds. Who could it be? Someone from a rival company, an internal promotion from one of the other drabber subsidiaries he'd always disdained. The leader of this new division, Finch said, his voice dropping slightly, building the tension. Cannot be someone who is part of the old way of thinking. They cannot be someone who values applause more than results. They must be a proven strategist, a ruthless pragmatist, and a visionary who can see not just the next quarter, but the next decade. He let the silence hang for a beat, his gaze sweeping the room one last time before it settled with deliberate, unmistakable clarity on Catherine Vance. "We did not have to look far. The architect of this new strategy, the author of the very roadmap we intend to follow, is already in this room. She has been working with us in confidence for over a year. She has proven her brilliance, her integrity, and her courage." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. He followed Finch's gaze and his eyes locked with Catherine's. In that instant, the entire world tilted on its axis. The condescending smirk, the pitying looks, the public humiliation he had inflicted upon her. It all flashed before his eyes, recast in the horrifying glow of his own epic miscalculation. It wasn't possible. It was a nightmare. Finch's voice boomed, sealing his fate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to announce the new Chief Executive Officer of the Aethelred Tech Division, Ms. Catherine Vance. The name hung in the air, echoing in the dead silence of the ballroom. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. No one breathed. No one moved. The collective shock was a physical presence, a thick, invisible blanket that smothered all sound. Then a single spotlight, as if guided by the hand of God, swung away from the stage and bathed Catherine's table in a brilliant, unforgiving white light. Nathaniel Sterling's face was a grotesque mask of disbelief. The colour had drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed horror. His eyes were wide, darting from Catherine to Alistair Finch, and back again, his mind refusing to process the reality of the words he had just heard. The heavy crystal trophy for Innovator of the Year sat on his table, suddenly looking like a cheap, gaudy paperweight. Brielle stared at him, then at Catherine, her perfect brow furrowed in utter confusion. The power dynamic, she understood, had just been violently inverted, and she was lost. From across the room, Catherine rose. She did not stumble or show any sign of surprise. She rose with a fluid, deliberate grace, a woman stepping into a role she had been preparing for her entire life. Her simple navy gown, which had seemed merely elegant before, now looked like a uniform of quiet, unassailable authority. As she began to walk towards the stage, the silence was broken by a smattering of tentative applause led by Alistair Finch himself. The applause quickly swelled, growing from a hesitant trickle into a roaring wave as the reality of the situation dawned on the audience. This wasn't just an announcement. It was a coup. It was a story. And they were witnessing its jaw-dropping conclusion. Catherine's walk was the longest of her life, each step of indication. She passed tables of stunned executives who had offered her polite, pitying smiles just an hour before. She saw the faces of people who had whispered behind her back after her divorce, siding with the obvious winner. Now they stared at her with a mixture of awe, fear, and frantic recalculation. Her path took her directly past Nathaniel's table. She did not look at him. She did not grant him the satisfaction or the torment of a single glance. Her focus was entirely on the stage, on the future. That single act of ignoring him was more devastating than any verbal retort she could ever have conceived. It relegated him to the periphery of her world, an obstacle already overcome, a detail already forgotten. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage and shook Alistair Finch's outstretched hand. He gave her a paternal, approving nod. "The stage is yours, Miss Vance," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. Catherine stepped up to the podium, the same podium from which Nathaniel had mocked her very existence just 30 minutes earlier. The applause died down, and a new, more profound silence fell, one of rapt attention. She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze calm and commanding. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," she began, her voice crisp and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast hall without a tremor. "Thank you to the board of Aethelred Global for your trust and for this incredible opportunity." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. "Mr. Finch is correct. The future requires a new way of thinking. It requires a commitment not to fleeting praise, but to sustainable, long-term value. It demands integrity in our operations, accountability in our leadership, and a relentless pursuit of excellence in our products." Her speech was a masterclass in corporate precision. It was devoid of emotion, yet it was the most powerful statement of the night. She didn't mention her past. She didn't allude to Nathaniel's speech. She didn't need to. Every word she spoke about accountability and integrity was an indirect, devastating indictment of him. "The Aethelred Tech Division will be built on a foundation of strategic clarity and operational discipline," she continued. "We will empower our innovators, we will streamline our processes, and we will unlock the immense untapped potential within our portfolio. Our work begins on Monday. I expect to meet with the heads of every subsidiary in the coming days to outline the path forward. She looked directly toward the front tables, where the heads of the various tech companies, including Nathaniel, were seated. Her message was unambiguous. "You will answer to me. Thank you." She concluded her speech, lasting less than 2 minutes. It was all she needed. She stepped back from the podium as another wave of applause, this one genuine and thunderous, filled the room. Alistair Finch stood beside her, beaming. A photographer's flashbulb went off, capturing the image that would be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The next morning, Catherine Vance, the new CEO, poised and powerful at the podium, and in the blurred, out-of-focus background, the ghost-white, shattered face of her ex-husband, Nathaniel Sterling. The king was dead. Long live the queen. The moment Catherine stepped down from the stage, the carefully constructed social order of the gala shattered. The gravitational center of the room shifted instantly and violently. A swarm of people, executives, investors, journalists, and former fence-sitters surged towards her, their faces alight with newfound admiration. Hands were extended, business cards were proffered, and voices buzzed with urgent congratulations. "An incredible move, Ms. Vance. A brilliant strategy. So, but my team would love to get 30 minutes on your calendar next week." Catherine handled the onslaught with the same unshakable poise she had displayed all evening, accepting the congratulations with cool professionalism. She was no longer just Catherine. She was Ms. Vance, the most powerful new executive in the industry. Meanwhile, at the front table, a circle of emptiness formed around Nathaniel Sterling. It was as if he had become radioactive. His sycophants, who had been laughing at his jokes minutes earlier, now avoided his gaze, suddenly fascinated by their dessert forks or the architectural details of the ceiling. They were sharks who smelled blood in the water, and they were swimming away from the wounded. Brielle, who had built her identity around being attached to a winner, looked at him with a dawning, horrified realization. The man she had adored for his power and status was now publicly neutered. His currency was gone. She slowly, almost imperceptibly, slid her hand off his arm. The gesture was small, but the finality of it was absolute. Nathaniel sat frozen, his mind a chaotic vortex of rage, humiliation, and sheer panic. CEO of the Aethelred tech division. It meant she wasn't just successful. It meant she was his boss. The woman whose ideas he had stolen, whose ambition he had ridiculed, whose very existence he had tried to erase, would now control his budget, his strategy, his future. The Innovator of the Year trophy on his table felt like a tombstone. He had to say something. He had to do something. Fueled by a desperate shredding of his ego, he stood up and started to move through the crowd towards Catherine. He pushed past a vice president and an analyst, his eyes locked on her. She was finishing a conversation with a senior banker when she saw him approaching. Her circle of new admirers parted, sensing a final dramatic confrontation. The ambient noise of the room seemed to fade away. "Catherine!" He hissed, his voice a choked whisper. He reached out his hand, about to touch her arm. She took a half step back, just enough to make his gesture pathetic and desperate. Her expression was not angry, not triumphant, not even pitying. It was neutral. It was the face a superior shows to a subordinate who is out of line. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and level, yet carrying the chill of an Arctic wind. The use of his formal surname was a deliberate, brutal power play. In that moment, she stripped away every vestige of their shared history, leaving only their new, starkly defined professional relationship. She checked the delicate watch on her wrist. "The celebration appears to be winding down. I have a great deal to prepare for over the weekend." She met his stunned, furious gaze. "We will speak on Monday. Please have your division's complete Q3 performance, analysis, burn rate projections, and a detailed staffing report on my desk by 9:00 a.m. sharp. I'll be scheduling your formal performance review shortly thereafter." She held his gaze for one more second, letting the cold, hard reality of his new circumstances sink in. Then, without another word, she turned her back on him and walked away, Alistair Finch falling into step beside her. Nathaniel Sterling was left standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, the crowd parting around him as if he were a leper. The sound of their whispers and the flash of a phone camera, capturing his utter desolation, were the only sounds he could hear. He had sought to humiliate her in a room full of their peers, to make her small so he could feel big. Instead, he had orchestrated his own spectacular public demolition. Catherine didn't look back. As she walked through the grand lobby and out into the cool New York night, she felt no giddy rush of victory, no petty thrill of revenge. She felt something deeper, more profound. It was the quiet, solid satisfaction of a meticulously executed plan. It was the feeling of her own worth reclaimed, not by luck or fate, but by her own intellect, resilience, and unwavering belief in herself. The past was finally where it belonged, behind her. Before her lay an empire waiting to be commanded. The digital clock on the bedside table read 4:30 a.m. Outside Catherine's apartment, the New York City sky was still a deep, inky black, punctuated by the distant, sleepless lights of other towers. For most of her life, waking at this hour would have been a symptom of anxiety, a mind too restless to stay quiet. But this morning, as she opened her eyes before the alarm, there was no anxiety. There was only a profound and potent stillness, a clarity of purpose that felt as solid and real as the bed she lay in. The victory at the gala felt a lifetime away. It had been the thunderclap. Today was when the storm itself would make landfall. She moved through her morning routine with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark. A 20-minute session on her yoga mat, not for exercise, but for centering. A simple breakfast of steel-cut oats and black coffee consumed while reviewing a data summary on her tablet. A preliminary dive into the operational metrics of the 6 subsidiaries that now fell under her command. Her mind was already at work, identifying patterns, flagging anomalies, and constructing the chess moves for the day, the week, the quarter. Choosing her attire was a strategic decision. She bypassed the severe, dark pantsuits that were the unofficial uniform of many female executives trying to project authority in a man's world. Instead, she selected a cream-colored sheath dress with clean architectural lines paired with a sharply tailored blazer in a muted slate blue. The ensemble was feminine, but formidable, communicating confidence without resorting to cliché. It was the armor of a woman who had no need to imitate masculine power because she was busy defining her own. As she fastened a simple silver watch around her wrist, the only piece of jewelry she wore, she caught her reflection. The woman looking back was not the ghost of Nathaniel Sterling's past. She was not the wounded wife or the struggling entrepreneur. She was the CEO of the Aethelred tech division. The title felt less like a prize and more like a mantle of immense responsibility. Alistair Finch hadn't just given her a job. He had placed a billion-dollar portfolio in her hands and trusted her to perform surgery on it. The personal history with Nathaniel was the catalyst, but the professional task at hand was now 1,000 times larger. The thought was sobering but exhilarating. Across town, in a penthouse apartment that felt more like a sterile art gallery than a home, Nathaniel Sterling was also awake. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night pacing the vast, cold marble floors, a glass of ludicrously expensive scotch in his hand, the Innovator of the Year award, sitting on his bar like a golden skull. The hours after the gala had been a cascade of humiliations. Brielle had vanished before dessert was even cleared, leaving behind only a text message that was as brief as it was brutal. "I think it's best we take a break. This is all too much." His phone, which usually buzzed with fawning messages after a public appearance, had been eerily silent, save for a few terse formal emails from Aethelred's legal and HR departments, outlining the reporting structure changes. Rage had been the first stage. a volcanic, consuming fury at Catherine, at Finch, at the universe itself for this betrayal. How dare they? After everything he had built, then came the frantic search for an escape route. He'd considered calling his contacts on the Aethelred board men he had schmoozed with on golf courses and at cocktail parties, but he knew with a sickening certainty that they would never cross Alistair Finch. Finch's power was absolute. Any appeal would be seen as weakness in subordination. He was trapped. Now, in the grey light of dawn, the rage and panic had curdled into something far worse, a cold, gnawing dread. The 9 a.m. deadline, the reports she had demanded, the very act of compiling them was an exercise in ritual submission. He, Nathaniel Sterling, the visionary, the rainmaker, had to package his own company's data like a junior analyst and hand-deliver it to the woman he had publicly scorned. He sat at his sleek minimalist desk, the laptop screen glaring at him. He pulled up the financials, the staffing charts, the R&D burn rates. These were numbers he usually glossed over, leaving the tedious details to his CFO, while he focused on crafting the narrative selling the dream. But now looking at them, through Catherine's eyes, the eyes of a forensic strategist, he saw the vulnerabilities he had ignored. He saw the bloated budget for Project Nightingale, a speculative AI venture that was his personal pet project, staffed with expensive visionaries who had produced nothing but buzzwords for 2 years. He saw the declining margins on their core products masked by aggressive marketing spends. The data didn't lie. His kingdom was a house of cards, and Catherine was the one who knew exactly which card to pull to make it all collapse. His hands, usually so steady when signing 9-figure deals, trembled slightly as he dragged the files into a single folder, labeling it Q3 Analysis, Momentum Dynamics. The simple act felt like signing his own death warrant. Catherine arrived at the Aethelred Tower at precisely 7:30 a.m. The morning shift of security guards, who had seen her coming and going for months as an anonymous consultant, now snapped to attention. The head of security, a burly man named Frank, stepped forward. "Good morning, Ms. Vance. Welcome." The deference was new, and it followed her across the polished granite floor of the lobby. Whispers trailed in her wake as employees recognized her from the news alerts that had blasted across the business world over the weekend. Her new office was on the 48th floor. It was a corner suite, vast and impersonal, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panorama of the city. The furniture was heavy dark mahogany, the relic of her predecessor, a man named Arthur Kensington, who had been gently but firmly pushed into retirement. The air was stale with the scent of old power. Catherine walked to the window, placing her hand on the cool glass. She wasn't admiring the view. She was assessing her territory. From here, she could see the distant office buildings that housed her subsidiaries. Her empire, an empire in disarray. Her new executive assistant, a man in his late 50s named Robert Connolly, arrived at 7:45. He was a veteran of the 48th floor, having served Mr. Kensington for over a decade. He was visibly nervous, holding a slim portfolio, unsure of what to expect from this new, unexpected leader. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a little tight. "I'm Robert Connolly. I've taken the liberty of preparing your schedule for the week based on Mr. Finch's transition notes. It's, of course, entirely flexible." "Thank you, Robert," Catherine said, turning from the window. She gave him a small, genuine smile that seemed to put him slightly at ease. "I appreciate you coming in early. First, please arrange for a design consultant to be here tomorrow. This office needs a complete overhaul. I want it to be a functional, collaborative workspace, not a museum. Glasslight modern. Get rid of all of this." She gestured to the heavy furniture. Robert blinked, surprised by the swiftness of her decision-making. "Yes, of course, Miss Vance. Second," she continued, her tone all business. "Please clear my schedule this morning until 10:00 a.m. I am expecting a meeting at 9. After that, Please set up 1 hour introductory meetings with the heads of the other 5 subsidiaries starting this afternoon, and connect with IT. I want a direct real-time data feed from every subsidiary's financial and operational dashboard integrated into my system by end of day. Yes, Ms. Vance, Robert said, scribbling furiously in his notepad. His nervousness was being replaced by a sense of professional respect. This was a leader who knew exactly what she wanted. That will be all for now, thank you, Robert. He nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Catherine sat down at the enormous mahogany desk. She didn't open her computer. She simply waited. The clock on the wall ticked with quiet, methodical purpose. 8:50, 8:55, 8:58. At exactly 8:59 a.m., there was a sharp knock on her door. "Come in," she said, her voice even. The door opened and Nathaniel Sterling walked in. He was dressed in one of his signature bespoke suits, a uniform of defiance. But his face was pale and drawn, the skin stretched tightly over his cheekbones. He clutched a slim silver laptop and a leather-bound folder. He strode to her desk and placed the folder on its polished surface with a thud that was just a little too loud, a petty act of aggression. "The reports you requested," he said, his voice clipped. Catherine didn't look at the folder. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Please sit down, Mr. Sterling." He hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying, sinking into the leather chair. The vast desk between them felt like a battlefield. "Thank you for being punctual." She began, her tone maddeningly neutral. She swiveled her monitor slightly toward him. "I already have the raw data, of course, pulled from the Aethelred mainframe this morning. I was simply interested to see how you would package it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. She had already seen everything. This wasn't a briefing, it was a cross-examination. She opened her own file and a series of charts and graphs filled the screen. "Let's start with Project Nightingale," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your report describes it as a long-term strategic investment in next-generation AI. My data shows an 18-month expenditure of $42 million with no product milestones, met no IP filed, and a staff turnover of 60%. Can you explain the strategic justification for continuing to fund a project that is by every measurable metric a failure?" He was ready for this. He leaned forward, summoning his old charisma. "Catherine, Ms. Vance, you have to understand, true disruption doesn't follow a tidy spreadsheet. We're attracting the best minds in the field. It's about fostering a culture of innovation. You can't put a price on that." "I can actually," she countered, pointing to a different graph. "The price is a 30% budget overrun for the entire R&D department, which has directly led to a 9-month delay on the 2.0 update for our core product, Momentum OS, the single largest revenue generator in your portfolio. Your culture of innovation is cannibalizing the product that pays for it. That isn't innovation, Mr. Sterling. That is mismanagement." He recoiled as if struck. She was using his own business school lexicon against him, but with a precision he could never muster. "Let's move on to staffing," she said, clicking to a new screen. "Momentum Dynamics has the highest ratio of marketing and administrative staff to engineers of any subsidiary in the division. Why does your personal executive office require a staff of 6, including a brand strategist?" "My brand is crucial to the company's public perception," he retorted, his voice rising. "The company's perception should be built on the quality of its products, not the cult of personality of its CEO," she replied calmly. "Your travel and entertainment budget for the last quarter alone could have funded the entire starting salary of a new junior engineering team." She went on a surgeon, dissecting a diseased patient. She dismantled his arguments one by one, not with emotion or personal attacks, but with cold, irrefutable data. The charisma he had relied on his entire life was useless against the wall of her logic. He tried to bluster, to deflect, to charm, but each attempt was met with a quiet, factual rebuttal that left him exposed and foolish. The showman was being systematically disarmed by the strategist. He felt the sweat prickle on his brow. The power, the control, the very air in the room belonged to her. Finally, after 20 minutes of this clinical demolition, she leaned back in her chair. The picture this data paints, Mr. Sterling, is not of a thriving, innovative company. It's of a bloated, undisciplined entity, dangerously dependent on its founder's reputation and headed for a severe contraction if market conditions shift even slightly. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. He was beaten. She let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. I am not going to fire you. That would be disruptive. For now. The implied threat was clear. Instead, you have a new mandate. You have 90 days to deliver a complete strategic realignment plan for momentum dynamics. It will include a 50% budget cut for all non-revenue generating projects, including the immediate termination of Project Nightingale. It will include a staff reduction of no less than 15%, focused on administrative and marketing overhead. And it will outline a clear metrics-based path to doubling your operating margin within 18 months. Your discretionary budget is frozen effective immediately, pending my approval of that plan. You will provide me with a written progress report every Friday by 5:00 p.m., and we will meet every Monday morning at this time to review it. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. You built this company, Mr. Sterling. Now you will learn how to run it responsibly, under my supervision. She swiveled her monitor back to face her. That will be all. You may go. Nathaniel stood up on shaky legs. The arrogance, the defiance, the rage, it had all been burned away, leaving only the hollow shell of a defeated man. He turned without a word and walked toward the door. The clicks of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floor sounded small and pathetic in the vast office. As he walked down this corridor of the 48th floor, he felt the eyes of the other executives and assistants on him. They knew. They could see it on his face. He was no longer the king. He was just another subordinate walking away from dressing down from the new boss. Back in her office, Catherine watched the door close. She didn't feel a surge of triumph. She didn't savor his defeat. She simply took a single deep breath, the first she felt she'd taken all morning. The weight on her shoulders settled immense and real. She had won the first battle, but the war for Aethelred tech had just begun. She looked out at the sprawling city, at the empire she now commanded. Then she turned back to her desk, picked up the phone to call Robert, and began the work of her new day. There was no time to waste, looking back. That night wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. Catherine Vance didn't just reclaim her dignity. She reclaimed the narrative that had been stolen from her, proving that true power isn't loud, arrogant, or dismissive. It's strategic, intelligent, and patient. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that your worth is not determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish you to elevate themselves. The ultimate victory lies not in stooping to their level, but in rising so far above it that they become an insignificant speck in your past. What would you have done in Catherine's position? How would you have handled that moment of public humiliation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and ultimate triumph resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible stories where the underestimated rise and redefine success.